Hey everyone, and welcome to the Stories Collective podcast, a collection of stories about God's faithfulness and how we as believers engage with God, connect with others, and live on mission. There are stories about God's work all around us, and we are excited to share those stories with you here.
Hello, hello. It is the week before Thanksgiving. I can hardly believe it. I'm your host, Sarah Shallow, and I'm so excited to be bringing you another episode of the Stories Collective today. We are talking with Christian Cordova. Christian is someone that has been attending Desert Springs for a little over a year, but very quickly became a pretty big part of the ministry that we do here. Christian is the one who translates our 9:30 service into Spanish. But way more than that, Christian has a story that is so unique. I don't think I've ever heard a story quite like it. I really think they should make a movie about his life, so I'm really excited that you're going to hear this. Today's episode is a little bit longer, but I promise you that it's going to be worth it, that you're going to be inspired, and you're going to be encouraged to follow our God even more. So let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Christian Cordova.
Bienvenidos a Historias Colectivas con Sarah Shallow. Espero que tengas un feliz miércoles. Mi nombre es Christian Cordova. Y no te preocupes, no necesitas saber español para este episodio.
That was amazing. I am so excited today. We are talking with Christian Cordova. The reason we wanted to start in Spanish is because Christian translates our 9:30 service every single week in Spanish. So while Pastor Steve is preaching, it's upstairs, right?
Yes.
Upstairs.
Second floor, I listen to him.
Yes.
Every single detail.
Yes. So I'm sure that's very meticulous. And we're going to talk about that later. But I didn't understand anything that you said. Well, I heard my name and I heard Stories Collective. But so when I was in high school, like you have to take like a foreign language, and they had Spanish and they had French. And I was like, you know what? Everybody takes Spanish. I'm going to take French. That was a mistake. Number one, I didn't do very well in the class. But number two, I ended up moving to Arizona. I mean, I was living on the East Coast at the time.
Okay.
I ended up moving to Arizona. I feel like Spanish would have been
way
more useful, but I took French because I wanted to be cool and different, but that did not really work out for me. So students, if you're listening, just try to think into the future a little bit when you're taking classes like that.
Yeah, and the benefit when you learn Spanish, you can actually learn French a little bit easier once you have down the Spanish part.
It's like it's called like the romantic languages, right? Yeah. I had to, like, for my music degree, I wasn't learning the language, but I had to learn, of course, I'm totally blanking now what it's called. Vocal diction, basically like learning how the correct pronunciation, because we would sing in different languages. But anyways, let's talk about you. So like I said, we have Christian Cordova in the studio today, and this has been a long time coming. I think we first connected maybe over the summer, just through email.
Yes.
You had been at Desert Springs, but through email, and then just schedules and everything. We're here now, so I'm so glad.
It was God's time, so that's fine.
Absolutely. So I'm really excited to share your story today, but before we get into that, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I was born and raised in Quito, Ecuador. That is south of Mexico, just in case, because sometimes I remember a long time ago that I said, where are you from? I'm from Quito. I'm like, what part of Mexico is that? Oh my goodness. I was like, south, way south.
Yes.
So I moved here to Phoenix, Arizona. Actually, this being the only place that I've been living in December 1999.
Wow.
So
how old were you then?
I was 20 years old. Yes.
So you really lived like your entire childhood and everything in Ecuador.
I'll say half of my life I live in Ecuador, half of my life I live here in the United States.
Wow.
So I'm married with my high school sweetheart, and I'm in charge of women's ministry in my house. I have 4 girls, so...
You said that to me a few weeks ago. I thought that was so funny because you're like, I run women's ministry. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then you're like, well, because I have a wife and 4 daughters. And I was like, yes. So
loving it.
Yes. And you work at Phoenix Seminary.
Correct.
Yes. So what do you do there?
I am the Hispanic Status Director. My job is to connect with churches, specifically with the Hispanic community in different parts of the valley or in the country. So I have the blessing, and I've learned also to be diplomatic in a way, because I encounter people that they have a totally different doctrine or theology from the one that I'm used to. So it's very interesting in the process to connect with members from my community, but my heart when I started working at Phoenix Seminary is to see if we can provide a way for leaders and pastors to be educated in God's word, to have the right doctrine, and to teach the flock in the proper way.
I love that. Well, and like I mentioned earlier, we will get into what you do here, but I don't want us to go there just yet. Yeah. So and maybe this will be a cheesy thing to say, when I first heard of your story, read your story, talked with you, I really think that they should make a movie about your life, because it is so interesting to me. I don't know that I've heard a story quite like this before. So I'm just looking forward to sharing it. So
the funny thing that you mentioned, that even my daughters, when I share a little bit of my story with them, they said, "Dad, I would like to write a book about your life." I was like,
see, your daughters will write the book, and then we'll work on the movie based on the book, based on your life. So yeah, I love that. So, I mean, we can just jump in. I don't know where you want to start.
Sure. Yeah. I'll start from the beginning, actually go way far from my life, because it starts with the connection of my parents. Both of them, they were very young. My mom, she was very young when she was my dad. She was probably around 17 years old. And
17?
17.
Wow.
And my dad around 20, 21, around that age, I don't remember exactly. But they met like any other couple at that time.
In Ecuador,
in
right?
Ecuador, yes. Yeah. All this happened in Ecuador. So they met, and they, obviously, being young, they had relationships. And in the process, the interesting thing that happened is that my dad, he encountered an Italian priest who actually convinced him to go to seminary and become a Catholic priest. So obviously, you know that in Catholicism, they have the celibacy. So you're not allowed to be married or have sexual relationships when you become a priest. So he knew that he was getting into that aspect in his life. So he wanted to eat the cake before stepping into that field. So I'm the result of that cake.
Wow. Wow.
So when he went to seminary, and I believe it was in Colombia when he was going to seminary. And then obviously I was born, and around when I was around 2 years old, he met me for the first time. That's the story that I collect because of my mom told me all these details. And
so basically he decides that he's going to become a priest.
Yes.
But then decides that he wants to have certain experiences before he becomes a priest.
He goes through that.
Then, so did he know that your mom was pregnant with you?
I think he found out somehow that she was pregnant, but it seems like someone told him that it was not his.
Oh, I see. Interesting.
So that's how he continued with his life doing in that aspect. But when he met me, the physical appearance was undoubtedly, okay, no, this is my kid, definitely.
Wow.
And I was around 2 years old when he met me. By the time he was already in seminary, just about to be a priest, to be ordained. And he had a conversation with my mom and asked her, I can drop seminary and get married and all that, start a family. But my mom, she knew that he fell in love with that aspect of his life and ministry. So she said, she took a very tough decision, decided, you know what, no, you love doing that. You continue being a priest, and I will raise my son as a single mom.
Wow.
So you don't have to worry about giving money. You don't have to worry about anything else. And I'll take care of my son, no matter what. Now, for this, let me tell you that we come from a very poor background, actually. I remember living with my grandparents in a very, just to give you an idea, the entire house was probably, the place that I used to live with my grandparents, it was probably the size of this room with a half of it, a little more, half of this room.
Wow.
So this room plus I have of this room again.
Well, and for context, because not everyone's been, we're in the studio. A lot of people wonder, they're like, where is the studio? It's upstairs. It's on the east side of the building. It used to be a kind of storage closet, kind of. Mm-hmm. So I'm really bad with like dimensions and stuff. I don't know, but this is not a very big room. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, yeah.
So
it was
wow,
in a small house.
Wow.
So it was just my mom taking care of me, and growing up, we had a lot of interesting experiences. That she was telling me that she needed to go to work, and we didn't have a babysitter, so sometimes she had to leave me alone.
When you were like really little?
When I was little, very little. And,
were you an only child?
That was the only child.
Okay.
Yes. So when I was growing up, then that is something that I have to thank God, because my mom, she did an excellent job in taking care of me and provide for me and all the process. So when I was growing up in the process, I knew my dad. I knew my family from my dad's side. And there was not a moment in my life that I have someone telling me, oh, this is your father, you can meet him. No, I always recall in my memory that he was my father. But growing up in a situation that he was a Catholic priest, actually have to hide my identity as his son. Obviously, we're living in a predominantly Catholic church, and you know that priests cannot have kids according with the doctrine. So I have to hide my identity for the entire world about that he was my father.
I guess I didn't realize, because we had talked a couple weeks ago, I didn't connect that he was basically in the same community that you were. For some reason in my head, he had like gone away somewhere.
Yeah.
But he was... So the church was where you were
at the
living.
beginning. Well, at the beginning, he was living in the same city. Now, we were not living in this kind of like the same neighborhood, but he was living in the same city.
Okay.
So he had what he's called that his church and a location that he ministered. And obviously, when I was connected with the family, I was known to the world like his nephew. Because my uncle, he gave me his last name, kind of like giving that perspective to the world that, okay, basically, I was the son of my uncle. That's why I have the last name. But in reality, the entire family knew. Close family members, they knew about it. And I recall this memory when I was a kid. I was probably maybe 4 or 5 years old. I have this vivid memory in my head running in the middle of a church in a mass when he was offering the mass, and running towards him and calling him Che Viejo. Che Viejo, it was kind of like a nickname that I believe he was the one who told me like how to call him. So instead of calling him Dad, I used to call him Che Viejo, which is kind of like saying like an old man, kind of like something like that.
Oh, old man?
Kind of like, hey, old man. Kind of like a cute way to say it.
Okay.
So
wow,
that was my way to openly talk to him when I was a kid. So
when did you? Because that, like, my heart just hurts hearing this. Like it's really, and we're not really even into the meat of the story yet. But when did you kind of realize this is not a typical experience, like for a kid to be? I mean, of course, we would love if everyone had their mom and their dad in a perfect family life. That doesn't happen for everyone. But for then you to like, you're separated from your father, but in a very interesting way. When did you realize that was...
It was a struggle for me when I was growing. And then I remember there was some meetings at school that like parent meetings that the mom and the dad, they needed to go to talk about how the kid is doing in school.
Yeah.
And I vividly recall my mom going to the meetings and me being outside and seeing all the parents walking there. And I was like, that I'm missing something.
Yeah.
And so inside of me, I realized that I don't have a normal family. There was an experience that I had. I had a rosary in my hand, and I was struggling because of, in a way, I was angry with God. In my head, I had this idea that God stole my dad. He took my dad away from me because I didn't have what is be considered quote unquote normal family. So yeah, there was a point in my life that when I was a teenager, that I was struggling with that aspect of not having a normal family. And on top of that, not be able to being open to share about my life, like who's my mom, who's my dad, why they're not married. And had to come up with this idea that I know that it was implanted in my head from my dad's side of the family. And I didn't know at the time, but later on I realized like, yeah, that was something that I was given to me my dad's side of the family to say that if I was going to share my story with somebody, if I was going to be openly public and say like, yeah, my dad is the priest, he's doing the mass over here, that person will have a disappointment with the religion because of what this priest did. And they were going to have a disappointment with God in the process. So in my head, I have this idea that my secret was keeping someone else's salvation, basically, their relationship with God.
Oh my goodness. So they're putting that on you, saying, if you tell anyone about this, that person will be affected.
Exactly, in their relationship with God, because of they will be disappointed with the religion, therefore they're going to be disconnected with God. So I have this burden inside of me without even understanding where it came from. Later on, years went by, and when I was an adult, I look back and I remember one of my uncles, he told me about this verbally. It's like, it was kind of like an entire revelation in my head. I was like, now I know where it comes from.
Yes.
I know where this idea, this lie came into my head of me being open and public and doing this. And obviously my entire family from my dad's side, they were protecting the reputation of the priest. So in that environment, that culture, having a priest in the family was like a big thing.
Yeah.
Like, because in a way you have a very close connection with God because you have a priest that can intercede for you, kind of like that funny idea that they had. So my entire family was very eager and protecting this patriarchal figure of the priest in the family. So they did that and put it in my head. And I grew up with that idea, that mentality of like, okay, then I need to be quiet for someone else's belief in God in that process.
Wow. Man, that is like, that's heavy.
Yeah.
It's really heavy because they basically were saying like he's more important, or like this family status thing is more important than Christian having a relationship with his father.
And obviously there were some situations that I need to be marginalized from family gatherings, so things like that happen, because obviously people are going to ask, who is this kid? So, I mean, but I have to be clear on this. My grandpa and my grandma from my dad's side, they were very lovely. I love them to pieces. They celebrate birthdays with me and all those events. But for major events that other people outside of the family need to be involved, I was not invited. And I was marginalized in the process. And there were situations even that people that, friends from the family, that they had a gathering, and they invited everybody in the family except me. Because they wanted to avoid that aspect of explaining who's this kid.
Yeah.
So on top of that, the rejection from my own family.
Yes. I am like almost brought to tears right now. I mean, it is just like, that is so devastating as a child to be experiencing that. So I can imagine, and you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier though, that maybe the way that you were viewing God was starting to be affected by all of this.
In my relationship with God at the time, it was more by tradition more than anything else. I went to mass every Sunday. I was that was kind of like the tough part of my teenager years. I was in a military Catholic high school, which was basically enforced for you to go to mass. And if you skip mass, you had to pay by push-ups.
That sounds intense.
It was very intense. It was kind of like a bad combination, military with Catholicism at the same time. So
actually, that's funny. You hear of like military school and Catholic school. They're both intense experiences. And then, wow, bringing it together. Oh my goodness.
But my knowledge about God was very, very limited, to put it like that. It was basically whatever I learned in mass. And I recall situations that I asked my dad about certain things about God. But when I look back into those memories, I don't recall him opening the Bible and reading, this is what the Word of God said. Most of those answers, they were like anecdotes, illustrations, and even dreams. I remember asking him about purgatory. Instead of opening the Bible and explaining it to me, he says like, well, I had a dream about that aspect. And he gave me this speech about this dream. And I was like, well, okay, you're my dad and you're a priest. I have no doubt whatever you had to tell me. So my connection about God and my knowledge about God came from that channel. And I had no intention of questioning whatever he had to say to me.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that just sounds like a lot to process, but at the same time, that's what you knew as your life, you know, like you didn't really know any different, I guess. But so you mentioned that you married your high school sweetheart. So maybe we can touch on that a little bit. We'll get back into the...
It goes parallel in that aspect because the funny thing the way that I met her is my aunt, I was 14 years old at the time.
When you met her?
Yes. Oh. My aunt, she was dating Santiago, is his name at that time. And Santiago's sister is Paola, that girl that I met that day. And there was a day that my aunt came and says like, hey, let's go to a quinceañera. We'll go to a birthday party. I was like, nah, I'm not interested. Like, I don't want to go. Come on, there are going to be girls over there. I was like, nah, whatever. I don't care about that. It's like, I was too young. Like, nah, doesn't matter. Come on, it's going to be dancing. It's going to be a really nice party. And I was like, no, whatever. It's like, come on, there's going to be free food. Okay, let's go.
Yeah, let's go.
Let me get ready.
I'm in the car.
And then I went to this party. And the funny thing is that Paola, she knew about me, about my existence, because, her brother is dating somebody who has a nephew, but she had an idea of me that I was kind of like a boy. I was going to bring my toy cars and play in her party.
She thought you were like a little boy.
Yeah, exactly, like a kid. And I had an idea of her, like, well, she's the typical probably teenager that looks up to college students or something in that matter. So the funny thing is that when we met, I was really captivated. Like, oh, I really like this girl.
Oh.
And it wasn't her party. The funny thing is that...
Wait, it was her party or it wasn't?
Yeah, it was her birthday party.
Oh,
it was at
wow.
her quinceañera.
Oh.
So when I met her, the funny thing is that there was a boy who wanted to propose, like, to be, hey, can you be my girlfriend? That night that I went to the party. And so, but I broke up all the concept that he wanted to have because I ended up dancing with her all night and just talking with her all night.
Oh, my goodness.
So I even have a picture on my phone that was the very first picture that somebody took of us that when we just met. So she was 15, I was 14. And when I look back at that age and I now look at my daughter, she's 15. She's exactly the same age that I met her mom. I was like, what was my father-in-law thinking? She's so little. What?
You're like, let's not go down this road.
Like, no, please. And the funny thing is that my daughter is just going to be 15. I was just in my mind, that was the exact same age that I met your mom. Like,
yes.
Oh my goodness, there's no boy in my at this time. Just in case I wanted a boy to repeat again.
Wow. So when did you all get married?
Well,
or am I getting off the timeline a little bit?
It will be fine.
Okay.
Because we started a relationship, we broke up, and we started a relationship again, and we were very young, naive in the process.
Oh, yeah.
So when I moved here to the United States, I was 19 at the time, turning 20, and we broke up the relationship because I wasn't not even considering getting married. So I came here, moved here. So I thought like, well, that was about it. I'm come here for an adventure, to find a new life and see what is going to happen to me. So that was the idea. So yeah, she was my first love, the love of my life. And again, I was not a believer. I was immature. So I had nothing planned in my head about that.
Okay.
But God had something different.
Yes,
God had something different.
So let's get back to you kind of having these conversations with your dad about trying to ask him about spiritual things, but him not really using the Bible but then you're trusting him. Like, yes. So I'm sure that just had an influence on what you believed about God, about religion, if we want to use that word. Like,
it was, I can put it like this. Because of him, I knew enough for me to be mediocre in my knowledge of God. Like, I didn't want to explore more about it. It was like, oh, but that's fine. Because even I had this ridiculous idea, but like, he's a priest and I'm his son. So I think I have a good shot to go to heaven because I have someone who works for God in the process. So like, absurd.
Yeah. Yeah. So how was your relationship with him as you were getting older?
My relationship with him, I didn't have a good relationship and I didn't have a bad relationship. It was kind of different. I wanted so bad as any other kid to have a father in my life. But in the process, I tried to connect with him. I tried to know about him, talk to him, but he was very kind of like an arm's length in regards to his personal life. And when I was growing, I had this... I honestly I saw him kind of like an idol of my dad in the sense like he was very admired. He was very admired. He was an excellent priest. A lot of people went to his masses. He had when he was going to preach somewhere, a lot of people went to that. And when I was listening to him, it was like, because he was charismatic, very enthusiastic. People, he brought a lot of people in the process. So I put it like in a pedestal. Him like, wow, he's really good. Like even to the thing in my thinking, it was like maybe they were going to make him a pope sometime because he was really good at what he did. But when I was growing up, I realized like, well, he was just a human being, like everybody else. He made mistakes, and there was a point in the process that, in parentheses, in all this, that my father was not a saint, and the celibacy concept that he needed to go through, it was not ideal, to put it like that. Because when I was around 17 years old, I met my sister.
Wow.
And I'm talking about my half-sister from my father.
From your father's side. Wow.
Well, he was a priest. So she was 8 years old and I was around 17 years old. And the interesting thing about it is that I met her before my father introduced me to her. And that happened because like this.
Did you know she was your sister when you met her?
No, that was the thing, because my girlfriend at the time, Paula, her cousin, she went to this school. And she was, Chiara is my sister's name. They were classmates. And there was an event that we all went together, and I saw my sister for the first time without even knowing that she was my sister.
Oh my goodness. Did you feel like any kind of connection?
I felt something kind of odd. And even the same way for I was like, I don't know, the other girls, like, she was little, obviously, but there was something different about her.
I've heard that like when people who have been adopted or like separated at birth or something that like, and then they meet and they don't know they're related, but there is like this weird like feeling of like, wait a minute. Wow.
There was something odd in the process. So I met my sister without knowing that she was my sister.
Wow.
And then because, I don't know if I think because of that meeting that we had, then my dad found out about that meeting. So he decided like, I think it's time for you to.
He wanted to get ahead of it.
Yeah. So then he introduces both of us together, and we would get to know each other. And it was a beautiful relationship that we had because we didn't grow up together, so we avoid the fighting aspect of going together. So I love my sister to pieces. But
how many years in between?
She was 8 at the time. I was 17. So it's like.
So he had already been a priest for a long time.
Yes. He was a priest. So that was one of the things like okay, he's not a saint as I thought, as he was.
So, and we don't need to go down this road, but the church didn't know.
They knew.
They did know.
They did.
Oh
know.
my.
Yes, there are a lot of things that you don't know about the Catholic Church that the head of the church they knew about it.
Wow.
They knew about my existence as well.
Wow.
So there are a lot of things that were like, wow, and not only with him, but with other things. Leaders on the Catholic Church that will be like, wow, I didn't know that happened. Well, yeah, but it does.
Oh my goodness. Wow. So, well, I'm glad that you and your sister were able to develop a good relationship. And
it was beautiful from the beginning, but it's something that I regret deeply in my heart, even till today, is the fact that when I met my sister, it reminded me when I was a kid, when I wanted to have that connection with my dad, but I couldn't because he was a priest. And from my part, I did what my family did with me, with her. What I'm talking about is the fact that since my father's family told me this lie that I need to keep secret the identity of the son of a priest, I did the same thing with my sister. And I shared that with her, like, hey, I think you should keep this in secret. You should not tell people that he's your father because of people may be disappointed with all that lie that was given to me. I gave it to her. And what breaks my heart is the fact that at the beginning, she was struggling with that. Like, no, I don't want to do that because he's my father and I want to be able to share with people. And I was putting that in her head to the point that later on, and I'm going fast forward, when I became a Christian and I told her, and I let her know, I am so sorry for telling you that.
Yeah.
I was wrong. I was completely wrong in telling you that. And her answer was, no, you did the right thing because I know that we have to protect my father's identity.
Oh,
and it broke my heart. I did that.
Oh.
I did that with my sister, and I regretted that until today.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I know that was probably not the easiest thing to share, but it's interesting how we sometimes, unfortunately, we repeat those things,
Yeah.
the things that were done to us, we end up repeating them. I don't know if that's because of sin or what, but it's like there's like that verse that talks about like the children paying for the sins of the family or the parents or whatever. And so sometimes I think about that, like the repeated behaviors. Like sometimes I wonder if that's part of it. So I'm still just so sorry for your experience, but I think it's pretty amazing that then you were able to, once you became a Christian and were working through other things, that then you were able to reflect back and then go to her and say, hey, like, I want to talk about this. So, wow.
And I appreciate if you pray for her. She's still very devout Catholic.
Okay. Yeah.
I've been sharing the gospel with her and with her family as well. And I wish them the best, but I know that they need Christ.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, so, okay, you ended up moving to Arizona.
Yes.
So let's talk about that.
My dad, he had a place that his church was in Ecuador. Then he started to travel around the world. He was kind of like a international preacher, to put it like that. And he was invited to come here to the United States. He came to the United States. He went to different places. And then at the end, he stayed here in Arizona. So when I graduated from high school, had this opportunity to come here and live with him. So
your dad?
With my dad.
Oh, wow.
So when I came here to Phoenix,
wait, and were you still hiding that you were his son when you were here?
That was the point. When I was going to come here to United States, I had this hope and this dream. I thinking like, finally, I'm going to be in an environment that I don't have to worry about.
Yeah, we can be father, son.
Exactly. That was my dream. As a kid, I was like, more than coming here to the United States, was like, I'm going to finally have the opportunity to live with my father and enjoy this relationship of father and son. So that goes parallel to the part that I broke up with my relationship with Paola at the time. Then I moved here to the United States, and I have this hopes of living with my father, but everything went down to the toilet because when I came here, he was living in a something kind of like a simulated monastery, put it like that, because he was living with people who wanted to become priests, people who wanted to become nuns. So it was even worse than living in Ecuador.
Oh, wow.
That, because I was going to be in the same house with other people that I definitely needed to close my mouth, and I cannot have an open relationship with my father because they had him as a priest figure. And for them, he was obviously my uncle. So it was devastating for me. It was really devastating for me because my dreams of finally being with my father, they were torn apart, totally broken. And now coming to this very religious environment, it was very tedious for me. So I avoided being at home by all means. And it was kind of like a very difficult year for me because you have to put on top of that this homesickness that I have from my country. So coming to a place that is a different language, you don't have friends, you don't have a place to go. And the family, I mean, my dad that I was hoping to have this relationship. It never happened. I remember there was one time I was driving the car and his car, and I was just going somewhere, and that was just broken because like, I have nowhere to go. I have no place to be. I have no friends here. So it's like.
Could you speak English?
At the time, yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
Yes. I was able to learn a little bit of English at the time. And there was in the year 2000 that I went to GCC, Glendale Community College, and then I started to study. And I thank God for this when I'm looking back, that thank God at that time I didn't find refuge neither in alcohol or drugs or that matter, but I focused my attention in education. I was like, I wanted to be away from home.
That was your like escape.
I was like, that's my escape.
Okay.
And I started.
Could be worse things. You're right.
Yes, I know.
Could be way worse things.
I remember taking classes, and I took at the beginning, first semester, like 12 classes. Then second semester, because I wanted to avoid being at home, like I started taking even 24 credits per semester.
Wow.
So to the point that in 2 years, I graduated 4 degrees.
Oh my goodness.
Because I did not want to be home.
Wow.
So.
I mean, congratulations on your success in academics, but knowing the story behind it, it's a little bittersweet, I guess.
There was an interesting situation. I remember that happened in the house because there was a group of people that were living with him. They were kind of like upset with me because in their minds, their perspectives, my dad did something illegal to claiming me as his son, legally speaking, to come here to the United States. In their perspective, I was the nephew.
Oh, so they thought he was lying about you being his son, or no?
Yeah, because technically to come here to the United States, you can claim your son only.
Okay.
So in their perspective, I was the nephew that I was legally changed to be his son in order to come here.
So they believed him so much that you were his nephew. Am I tracking that?
Yes.
That they were so they were caught up in all of it, thinking this is his nephew, but he's saying it's his son.
Yes.
When you're like, no, I am his son, not his nephew.
There was a point in the situation that they were complaining with me, like, why do you treat him like that? What do you because my relationship with my dad was kind of like turning apart because of that situation. And they were complaining to me like, well, even after all that he did, even he can be legally in problems because of what he did. And I was so fed up in that moment that I exploded. It's like, no, it was not like that.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I want to like...
He needed to do that even more.
Yes.
Because he's my father. And I remember saying that and they were just stare blank like, what? He's my father.
Oh my
so
goodness.
This is the least that he has to do for his son. And I was so fed up, and I know that exploded at that time. It was not right, but I was so
I'm like feeling anger right now. Like I wish everybody could see my face. I'm like, what? Like, wow.
But yeah, that was something that then unfortunately my dad had to deal with that situation later on. I was like, no, I'll let you explain that. How
you can tell them.
I'm going to school.
Yeah. So did you eventually start to make some friends? Just the longer you were here, the more you were in school?
Yes, I think what it helped me a lot is I started to connect with students, but interestingly from international students, because I was able to connect because of the culture. Something that was a really shock culture for me is that I remember studying in Ecuador. I went to college. It will be called university, kind of the equivalent there. And the culture is so nice over there that the fact that by the end of the week, the first semester in Ecuador, you ended up knowing everybody's name. You get everybody's phone number, and by the first Friday of the first semester, you have a group of people gathering. It's like, hey, what are we going to do? Where are we going to hang out? That's kind of a thing. So when I came to that idea, well, probably it's going to happen the same thing over here.
Yeah.
So remember,
we're not as friendly, I feel like.
I went to GCC, and after an entire semester, I didn't even know the name of the person sitting right next to me. I was like, oh man, this is so difficult. But then connecting with other international students, like, yeah, we can relate, we can talk about it. And then here's where I met very good friends in the process, and where I met one individual that played a big role in my life, that is my best friend. In the process, he's from Mexico. We started to establish a very healthy relationship, like very good friends in the process. Although our personalities were very different.
Yeah.
We were very, very different. And we even have a conversation at that time. I was like, why are we friends? We were like, you think black, I think white, do you think go straight? I'm going to a different direction. I'm like, we're totally different in the process. And but then later on, we realized, we look back, I was like, okay, I see what is happening.
Yeah.
Now I know why God allowed this friendship, because my friend played a big role in the way that how God captivated my heart.
Oh, wow.
This relationship with my friend. What happened is that he was struggling with a sexual identity and some relationships in the process. And I remember I advised him to find a God, to seek for a God that I did not know. So I was telling him, you need to find God, but I didn't even know that God I was referring to.
Wow. Wait, so he was open with you and saying, I'm struggling with my sexual identity. Mm-hmm. And then your thought process was you should like seek God.
Exactly.
And wow. But you weren't doing that.
I was not doing that. I was not doing that at all.
When you just said like a God.
No, I was saying God. I was referring to the Catholic God.
Oh, okay. So you were telling him.
Because that was the only God that I knew.
Yeah.
And the way that actually even God used my dad in the process is that my dad talked to him and referred him to go to a special retreat in Mexico, that he was going to be able to spend some time getting to know God in the process. So he went to Mexico, and I remember driving him to the airport so he can go. And to my friend, yes. Yeah. And to make a parenthesis of the situation, he had an experience there that I wish I actually can be part of it. Because what was really fascinating is that when he went to this place, they took him with a bunch of high schoolers. They dressed him with kind of like white garments, and they drove them away from the city, like a very far land there in Mexico. And then all of a sudden he starts hearing, repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand. And then all of a sudden, like, one says like, hey, let's go. On the other side of the mountain, they see John the Baptist baptizing people. They're like, okay, this is interesting. And then
Wait, your friend is telling you?
My friend is telling me the story of what happened there in the weekend. And then he's telling me, and all of a sudden, I see the apostles coming, and then you see Romans there, and they see Jesus there. So he was basically involved in this big play of the very, like the most highlighted moments of Jesus' life. There was, I think, 2 or 3 days that he was immersed of this kind of like a play, a big play of people doing that. And he was saying, and during those days, nobody broke character. It was not like, okay, we're going to have a break. Like, no, he was kind of like moving back in time and putting it in there.
When you say that your friend said he saw John the Baptist, I was like,
no,
wait,
he was not crazy.
What?
No, basically saw the character playing John the Baptist.
I'm tracking now. I was like, wait a minute. What kind of retreat was this? But yeah.
No, but it was very interesting because basically they go to
so like an immersive experience.
Exactly, an immersive experience of being in a play that he is talking with the apostles.
Wow.
Seeing Jesus, and he had opportunity to be baptized there, and that experience, and even though that it was made by the Catholic Church, he said like there was no emphasis of Mary, no emphasis of saints. It was like just the most vivid moments of Jesus' ministry. And the way that it finished, it was basically when they crucified Jesus. They crucified Jesus, and then they gathered everybody. They brought them back to the city, and there was like, wow, that was sad. When you think of that, like that was the end of it. But the way that they ended is that they went back to this mass, to this church, and then all of a sudden the doors open, and they see the character who played Jesus walking in the middle of the church, kind of like he lives. That was the emphasis of the whole thing. So I was like, wow, that's really fascinating. Very interesting.
I've never heard of anything like that.
Wow. We were trying to look for like, I wish that I can go back just to see how it is, how it's done, because it was very interesting concept how they made it. But well.
So that brought him to Christ.
That was something that impacted him so profoundly that when I went to pick him up at the airport, now he was telling me, you need to know Jesus. It for me was like, okay, hold on just a second. What do you mean you need to know Jesus? Like, yes, you need to know him. So God used the situation in my friend's life for me to understand like, okay, something happened here. Because I knew that my friend was struggling with something in his life. And then all of a sudden he's changed. What happened here?
Yeah.
That was the way that God captivated my attention. It's like, I wanted to make sense of this. I wanted to understand what happened to his life. So in my head, I was like, I need to find a reason of all this that happened. So I decided to seek for answers of his life, to find out, okay, he went to a Catholic church. I'm going to start from Catholicism. I'm going to disregard all that I've known. I'm going to disregard all the information that I know since my childhood, because I want to get to know and understand this God. Because I saw a miracle in my friend's life that I want to see a reason for that. So I went to the point of like, I'm going to become to the point of being from atheism. I remember reading different books, even podcasts of atheism. Okay, which one makes sense? Even to Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, the Quran. Like, okay, which one is the God that is understandable? Even in Catholicism, and trying to find a reasonable answer to who is this God and how this God changed my friend's life. And in the process, I was exposed to different worldviews, and to the point that like, okay, I believe that the Bible is the only religious and historical book that goes beyond of any other historical book that makes sense. So after all this, summarized all the process, I realized, okay, I know this is the God that makes sense, because in the Bible is the only worldview, to put it like that I can find an answer to origin, morality, and destiny, in those when I see the world. So my point was like, now I wanted to find a place that they can teach me about this book, about the Bible.
So God almost used your, I don't know if you would want to use the word passion or whatever, for academics to bring you to him in a way, because it sounded like you were almost like obsessively studying and researching, like you said, multiple worldviews, multiple religions. Who is the true God? What is this true God? And it sounds like you found him through that.
It's funny the way they say, like, I found Jesus, but in reality, that's the way that God actually opened my eyes and says, like, okay, you need to see this. kind of like in that
wow,
way.
yeah.
So it's not that I found him, it's that he found me, but it's just that perception that I was not going through an emotional breakdown. I was not struggling, not even the relationship with my dad, that did not bring me to God. It was like seeing the miracle that he did in my friend's life, that like I wanted to understand him. And for me, that's why I'm passionate about apologetics. I love apologetics because it's through reason that I understand this magnificent God that I admire intellectually, that makes me experience emotionally my desire to worship him.
That is inspiring. Wow. That's really amazing. So what was the moment then that you gave your life to Christ?
I recall I like to put this date specifically that I was born again. It was on July 6th. It was on Wednesday, 2005. I remember going to, we visited different churches at the time because I wanted to find a church that I'd be able to learn from God's word. And we attended to this church, and they opened the Bible and started to read expository, like verse by verse, chapter by chapter, book by book. And I was like, okay, this is exactly what I want. Now I see that the Bible is important. Now I need someone to teach me specifically about the Bible. And I remember the pastor made an invitation. I raised my hand and I was like, yeah, I want to be part of the church. Where do I sign to be a member? If you're going to ask me at that time, what is the gospel? I have no clue. I was like, I just like to be here. But I remember there was a moment that during the process, I read a lot of books. I watched a lot of documentaries. There was a podcast that I listened, like my head was like a big bubble head, kind of like that, of information. But the moment that God broke me completely was, remember I was watching a movie again of Jesus being crucified.
Was it The Passion?
The Passion of the Christ.
Yeah.
It was The Passion of the Christ. I watched it for the third time. And then I realized when he was carrying the cross, kind of like, wow, he died for me. He died to forgive me for my sins. It is not about my background. It's not about my performance. It's not about what I do. It's about what he did for me. So it's kind of like all that information that was in my head. It went to my heart. And I remember just going to the living room, and there was a crucifix that was a gift from a family member. And I just kneel in front of the crucifix and realized in my head, I was like, you're not there, but I just want to focus my attention on something right now. And I was just crying like a baby. Like, I cannot believe it. You died for me. But the most beautiful thing on top of being saved is the fact that that weight that I had in my life of thinking that my secret was going to keep someone else's from their relationship with God, that my secret to revealing who was my father was going to hurt someone else's relationship with God. I was like, I was free even from that lie. I was like, now I see. That was foolish for me to believe, foolish for me to share that with my sister, foolish for me to even consider this idea, ridiculous idea. It was only about Christ. So that was the moment that it was a life-changing moment for me.
Yes.
I remember. That was the moment that I was born again and my life changed completely and everything.
Wow. That is amazing. I mean, I wish people could see you right now as you're talking. I mean, you're just so, like, I can see this excitement and happiness, but also a peace, like knowing that you found God. I mean, it's just amazing.
And there's something else that is very crucial also to emphasize here. The fact that when that happened, God providentially removed my father from my circle of influence, to put it like that. He went to a different state and he went back to Ecuador. And I say that as an importance because in a good and in a bad way. In a good way is because the influence of a father and a child. My connection with God and my knowledge about God, it was based upon my father. So God knew that he needed to remove that from my journey to know about God. And when he was removed from my life, I was able to understand, okay, now it's a one-on-one. I was able to know him. So the relationship of a father with a son is so important for good, and even can be considered for bad as well. So yeah, that was something that was very important that God did in my life for him to be outside of my circles of that journey, that walking of knowing God.
Wow. I mean, that's kind of all I can say. I mean, it's just, it's so cool, like hearing, and you know, you're the second person on this podcast to talk about how the Passion of the Christ movie was just very moving and helped solidify their relationship with the Lord. I
think it's because I'm very visual. I like this in a visual way.
Exactly.
So it's kind of like that vivid experience, kind of like, oh, wow.
Yes. Yeah. It was, I I don't remember what episode it was number wise, but it was Brian DeFrancesco. And it was very similar. He said he watched the movie and then he was driving and he was like crying and was like, oh my, I can't believe like that Jesus did this for me, you know, that God sent his son for me, you know. So it's just pretty amazing to hear about how God works in so many ways, multiple ways.
And something else that God did through my father is that in that process, when I was growing as a born-again Christian, I went to Ecuador. I remember he was there. And I was sharing with him my experience, like, well, I'm going to this Christian church and learning about the Bible. And he didn't know how to handle that situation. So he was just asking me questions like, okay, what denomination, who's the founder, what do they teach, and all that. And he gave me 2 books out of that conversation. One that was the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and the other one was Answers to Protestants.
Oh.
Now, when he gave me these 2 books in his mind, he's like, you're going to read these books and you're going to come back to the Catholic Church. That was his thinking. But he didn't realize that by that time I already read the Bible.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, it was the same Bible that he gave me long time ago.
Oh, wow.
So when I was reading both perspectives, the biblical perspective that I am saved by grace through faith, and when I was reading in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, that it says that if you consider that you're saved by faith alone without doing works, you're anathema. Basically, you're cursed because you need to work your way to salvation. So God used my father as a defining line to say, like, you cannot go back to the old religion anymore.
Wow.
So that was something that God even used my father to say, like, okay,
so interesting.
You're giving your life completely to me, not to a religion, to have a relationship with me, not to have a religion with me. And obviously that created a big conflict with my entire family because I was kind of like the black sheep of the family, being the priest, and then becoming the son of the priest becoming a Protestant,
right?
Getting that way. So that created a lot of tension in my family.
Wow. So I want to quickly circle back to your wife coming to the United States because we kind of, that's my fault. I got us out of order a little bit. So she ended up coming to the United States as well. Not the same time that you did though, correct?
No.
And this was the girlfriend that you met at the quinceañera.
That quinceañera girl.
Yes.
So, like I said, God planned it even, it was beyond perfect in the way that if I was going to think of a plan, I could put it like that way. Because she went to Philadelphia to work for a Girl Scouts for a few months with a work permit visa. And then she ended up finishing in 2 months. So she had 1 month extra. She didn't know what to do in a place that she didn't know. So we invited her, we still had a connection. We had the friendship happening between us. So my father knew her, and we invited her to come to Arizona. So she came to Arizona, and she stayed with us. She found a job. She had a work permit visa. So it was going through a process in Ecuador that we were financially changing the currency in the country. So the situation was bad. So for her, it was like, okay, I think I'm going to stay.
Okay.
So she took that challenge of, I'm going to stay, which you have to understand, for us culturally, it was a big deal because she actually talked with her parents and let her know, like, hey, mom and dad, I'm staying. And the parents, they were in shock, like, excuse me? You didn't ask for permission for that.
Right.
But then, and to make the story short, I was with somebody else in that time in a relationship, but all of a sudden those feelings started to come up again.
Yes.
And she opened her heart, says, like, I think I have feelings for you. And I was, I remember saying, like, I'm sorry, but I want somebody else.
Yeah.
And then there was a moment that she's like, I think I'm going to I'm going to move out from here because I cannot see you and being in that relationship. But when she said that, it dawned on me, like, no, I don't want you to go.
Yes.
Like, I think I have the same feelings for you again. So I broke up that relationship when we started the relationship again. And the funny thing is I graduated and asked her hand for marriage in my graduation. And we ended up getting married in 2003. That was the time. So
amazing.
It was a God thing, definitely, that I was able to meet the love of my life when I was so young. And then for him to bring her over here and connect us both together in the process. And in the process, I thank God that it was the journey of me knowing God. We did it together. We got baptized together. We grew up together in the process of knowing God. So I thank God for that.
That is amazing. Wow. Well, we only have a few minutes left. I wish we had way more time. I know that you really just went like all in with your faith. I mean, you became very involved in church. You started like more education
Yes.
in theology. And then, so when did you start at Phoenix Seminary then? I mean, I know we're covering a lot of years in like very short time, but
to make a story short, when I started serving in ministry, God gave me the opportunity to discover my spiritual gift. And it was on the mission trips that I discovered that was teaching. And when I came back from Mexico, there was the time that I did that. I started preaching in a young adults group. And the funny thing is that people approached me as like, oh, that was a great sermon. I was like, oh, thank you. It sounds nice. I like it. I think I want to become a pastor. Obviously, I was for wrong motives.
Yes,
I was very prideful in the process. But God was so good with me that he humbled me for 7 years being the youth leader of a high school ministry.
I feel like all the youth leaders and pastors out there, youth pastors are like, yeah.
Exactly. Because when you preach to a high schooler, it's like just preaching to the walls. Like, are you alive? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, yes. So he humbled me for 7 years. Then those 7 years, I had to step down from ministry because my daughter, she was diagnosed with diabetes type 1. So I had to focus my attention on her. It was 2014. Then during that year, the Lord opened the opportunity for me to work full time in a Hispanic ministry. I was ordained as a Hispanic executive pastor in a Hispanic church. And really story short, when I called my mom, interestingly enough, my mom became a Christian before I did.
Oh, wow.
So that was another story there. And then I called my mom, I was like, hey, I'm going to be I'm going to be ordained as a pastor. And she was like, I'll be right there. Like, I'm going to buy the ticket. I'm not going to miss that for the world. When I called my dad, say, hey, just to let you know, I'm going to be ordained as a pastor. He was a silence in the other line. He just said, are they going to pay you well?
My goodness.
Like, yes, Dad, don't worry. We're going to be fine.
Yeah.
But then I continued my education. I was ordained as a pastor, continued my education at Phoenix Seminary. I was blessed to continue my education there and graduated a year ago, actually.
Oh, congratulations.
And so I ended up my master's in divinity there with emphasis in family counseling. Go figure, family counseling. And from there, I started working at Phoenix Seminary in 2018, making that connections with pastors. And in the process, by serving in this church, COVID hit. And that was something that it was really struggling for us in the church because we cannot recover financially after COVID. So we had to close the church.
It was so hard. It was, I mean, hearing those stories, that was probably one of the, I mean, there was a lot of heartbreaking things about COVID, but that was something that was hard, was just hearing about churches that closed and just, I
remember the last day, it felt like a funeral. It really felt like a funeral, just saying goodbye to people on the last day. So when that happened, and that's my connection with Desert Spring, I was looking for a church. Like, I need to find a church to plug in my family, for my daughters to grow up. And I was looking for a non-Hispanic church. Because after my experience working in seminary, connecting with churches, most of the Hispanic churches, they have this problem of only focusing in the Hispanic group, meaning those who speak Spanish. But the second generation is the one who suffers the consequences because they understand and learn better than English. And most of the Hispanic ministries, they do not have an equipped leadership that they will deal that in English. And if they do have that, once that the kids grow up, they cannot plug in the Spanish ministry because they understand better in their language. So what ends happening is basically they move to a different church, to an Anglo church, put it like that. So the families ended up breaking apart.
Yes.
So I wanted to find an Anglo church specifically that they have the heart for a Hispanic ministry. And that's how I ended up visiting different churches, and I had the blessing of knowing Desert Springs. Because years ago, we came for a vacation Bible school that I brought my two oldest daughters. So that's how I know the existence of this church. Then later on, discovering for a church, I connected with some kids that are friends from my daughters that went to SMI. And SMI was something that I was investigating. I was like, wow, this is really good. I really like how they invest in this church for the youth. So that was my connection with this church. Like, I definitely want to be here. So the first time that I stepped into this church, it was on a Saturday in a DS 101 class. And,
DS 101.
And that was the first time that I stepped in this church. So when Mark was asking, okay, how long have you been here? People would say like 8 months, 2 years. And I was like, 10 minutes. So it was a perfect scenario because
But you know what? Knowing you, it makes so much sense because of your, like, the way your mind works with like academics and education and
Yes.
stuff. You're like, I want to know like what they believe and what they're going to be teaching and what they're, so I get it.
I didn't want to spend weeks and then realize like, oh no, they have this doctrine or whatever it is.
Right. You're like, let me just hear it right now.
So, but after that, at the end I was like, I think we're ready to be members. So then after that, we were able to talk with Pastor Steve and then to share my heart, like this is what I liked. My intention is not to, to develop a Hispanic ministry, but not with the idea to grow up a church inside of a church and then branch out to become a different church.
Not like a plant.
No, I don't want that. I don't want that. I want a church within the church in the sense that we are part of the same church. We are in the same community, but ideally there will be a multi-ethnic, multicultural church. So people will come and grow no matter the language. So that's why I provided an opportunity for people to come. If you want to invite people to the church and let them know like, hey, yeah, but I speak English. Oh, don't worry.
Yes.
We can translate this for you.
I love it.
And for us to be under the same leadership, the same concept of engaging with God, connecting with others and living a mission in the same vision going in that perspective. And for the second generation to be fed in the same under the same roof, and for the parents to understand in their own language, and then giving them the opportunity to learn more in depth in their own language. That's why I give a class during the third service in the room 206. Then I'm going to the Gospel of Matthew right now.
Yes. Amazing. I mean, I am just, when I got to hear more of your heart, I mean, I've known that you've been doing this for a year now with us.
Yeah, it was started in February, actually.
Okay.
I started attending in November.
November of 21?
Yes. Yeah.
21. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Wow. So we're coming up on a year of you being here and then the ministry starting, a couple months later. And so, I mean, I've known that you've been doing it, but then when we just got to meet a few weeks ago and talk and just hearing your heart, I mean, I was so excited about everything that you're doing. Your heart for the Lord is just like so evident and incredible, amazing. I mean, I just think God is going to continue to use you greatly. And so we're just so glad to have you here.
Praise God.
So 9:30 service is when you translate into Spanish. And the way that people can access it is through the app, through the Desert Springs app. So if you have a friend that would prefer to hear our services in Spanish, that's how they can find it. And then Christian also teaches a Sunday school class in room 206 at the 11 o'clock hour. Correct? So you're doing a lot. You're busy.
And I love it. I love to serve this church. And I fell in love with the congregation. And even with this podcast that you're doing, that's how I started to connect more with people, knowing more
I'm
about
happy to
people
hear
that come
that.
here to church and they realize, like, because it's a big church, but I listen to the stories and realize, like, oh, I think I know a little bit better this person, this individual.
Yes.
By listening to the story.
Yes. Well, I'm glad that you got to be a part of it now too. So Christian, it has just been really amazing getting to hear your story, and I still think they should make a movie about your life. But I'm just encouraged and inspired by just, again, your heart for the Lord. I mean, is there any final encouragement or a takeaway that you would want someone to have from your story?
Sure. I think one of the two lessons that I look back in my life, and when I share my story, and people, like, when you mentioned, like, wow, that felt really bad. I'm sorry that you go through that. But then I realized it was God's plan all the way. Because even that situation, as painful as it was, I look back and I think I will not be the person that I am right now if it wasn't because of that experience.
Yeah.
I do not regret anything that happened in my life, because that was the God's plan for me to be the person that I am right now.
Yeah.
To know the things that I know right now. And the other thing that it was for me to be in the place that I am right now is also being available. Because during the process when I was born again, and I was just like, Lord, you gave your life for me. The least that I can do is give my life to you. What do you want me to do? And I was just available. The interesting thing is that I never look, at the beginning I had the wrong intentions to become a pastor, but then I realized, like, no, it's your plan. And I never looked to be hired in a church. I never looked to be a pastor. I never looked to work at Phoenix Seminary. I never even looked to go to seminary, for that matter. But in my heart is, Lord, whatever you want me to do, I will be available. And God has brought me to places, even to here, to Desert Springs, like, Lord, whatever you want me to do, whatever you want me to be, I will be there. And it's amazing to see what God can do in your life when you just allow him to guide you, control your life. You just need to surrender and be available. Yes.
Wow. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Christian, for being a part of this project. I'm just so grateful. It's an honor and a privilege to share your story. And so if you see Christian around, say hello, thank him for sharing his story, ask him about the ministry that he's a part of. And we just look forward to hearing more and more about how God's using you.
Thank you very much. It was really a pleasure to be here.
I don't know that I've ever met someone quite like Christian, and I mean that in the best way. I'm sure you gathered from his story how much he loves God, his desire to serve God, and that's just amazing to me considering the circumstances that he grew up in. I just think Christian has an amazing heart for the Lord. I would definitely encourage you to meet him, to talk to him, to hear about what he feels the Lord has called him to do, and maybe even you could be involved with that. Thank you all so much for listening to this project. I'm just blown away each and every week by the stories that we get to share. So I hope you'll join us next Wednesday as we share another story of God's amazing faithfulness.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Stories Collective, a podcast ministry of Desert Springs Community Church in Goodyear, Arizona. The Stories Collective is hosted by Sarah Shallow and produced by Brittany Petrie and me, Brandon Petrie. If you like our podcast, please remember to subscribe, share, leave a review, and if you want more information, please visit dsechurch.com.